Hi everyone, welcome back to Kingdom College. It's Celine and we'll be going through a power reading test 33 today. So some key points I want to emphasize for this test is learning how to read figurative language. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, figurative language is the idea of reading beyond the lines. So reading beyond the lines means understanding the real meaning of the text and sometimes beyond that, understanding that there's a little bit more meaning to the text than it's actually giving us. We'll just touch on that idea a little bit today. And then also, I want to focus on reading the tone of the text. So, tone, we already know, is the overall feeling of the text. Like, how are we as readers supposed to feel, or how is the character supposed to feel, how's the author supposed to feel, etc., right? Something that's very common in these texts, however, is that these social settings change. So, for example, if you're having a conversation with a friend, you might use colloquial language and slang, and you'll use nicknames, abbreviations, inside jokes, and so forth, right? But if you were talking to, say, an interviewer or your boss or manager, right, you would speak more formally rather than using a bunch of slang. This flows well with reading figurative language because we're reading a little bit beyond the lines in that sense. We're actually trying to figure out, what does the slang mean? Like, for example, what does mid or slay actually mean, right? We use these certain words for specific social settings. It makes it more meaningful, establishes the tone or the feeling. So yeah, those are just some points that we're going to be looking at today. Also, here is the first text that we'll be going through. Please screenshot this and read it in your own time. I'll put a side-by-side video after this. So question 1 asks us, the special day was a day spent blank. So let's take a look at the poem itself. In the very first few lines, it's established that this character is at a beach, especially because it says the Blue Rimmed Beach right over there. All right, they do talk about going down a steep green hill. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I actually want to focus on this part where it says, not wanting to miss one searching wave. That's because this person is waiting for a wave in the ocean. So this main character is out surfing in the ocean. So the answer is A. Now, the reason why it's not them climbing hills or writing poetry or listening to a trainee is because that is not what is emphasized in this poem. That is not the main focus. In comparison to those other activities, most of the lines are actually spent describing the waves and the act of surfing itself. Was most likely written, so we're looking at tense. And throughout the entire poem, they actually do use this past tense. If we look at was, I was, I ran, swung. There's so many parts of the poem that is just in past tense, right? So in that case, we would only actually have options C and D, when the poet had returned home and a long time after the actual event. So I want to go to the last few parts of the poem now. Now here they start saying, it starts establishing its nostalgic tone, or at least reinforcing it. But I actually want to look at this part where it says, days have passed since then, days without number, days and nights, oceans of time, and yet that one day, that special day, clings on to me forever, with the sun setting fire to the sky. So it's very clear that this is a poem that has been written a long time after the actual event, because the narrator starts telling us multiple days or multiple periods of time where life has just gone by and they just still think about this day they had at the beach. It's not C, because when they say when the poet had returned home, they're talking about like the drive home, say like the next day or the next week, right? So option C is more so I guess, still within that window of time, whereas D is over a multiple period of time. I have reference to the entire poem, but I'll just have it up anyway. So, the following lines are most likely indicated or intended to show how blank. So, in this extract, there's a strong focus on time, okay, and the minutes and the hours is what I want to look at more specifically. It's almost as if the author is actually narrating how much they're enjoying their time at the beach, because time just goes by, and it's like that feeling when you're enjoying something so much that you're not keeping track of time. In fact, you lose track of time because you're just so focused on what you're doing. So in this case, the answer would be B, in a positive manner. Okay, the lonesome part, the fun, and A and C wouldn't be plausible in this case, because being alone is not the focus in that specific extract. How much fun that poet is having. It's implied that they are having fun, but like I mentioned before, the focus is the fact that time is just passing by. And this fun, carefree tone is not as strongly emphasized as time just passing by. Indeed, the poet kept check on time is just completely untrue, so it can't be D. In question 4, they're asking us for the overall tone. So how do we as the audience genuinely feel? So just looking back at the key points of the video, in this case, the only option, if we read the entire poem, would actually just be nostalgia. This entire poem is a reflection of a beautiful day that this author had on the beach. Days have passed since then, days without number, days and nights, oceans of time, yet that one day, that special day, clings on to me forever, okay? So nostalgia is this good, reflective feeling, literally quite literally, when you look back on a day that you really enjoyed. Regret is not feeling like feeling as if you could have done something better, or wishing you hadn't done something. This is a negative connotation often associated with sadness and anger. Sorrow is like grief when you've lost something, a lot of sadness. Hope is a lot of planning for the future. Because this poem is so focused into the past, we can't say it's hope, and although it does have positive emotions, and it can't be A or B because there's a lot of grief and a lot of sadness towards it, and it's got a light-hearted emotion in this poem. The second extract, and we'll be deconstructing this through the questions. So, for the first question we have, what is the function of Rove's opening questions? So if we take a look at the opening lines, we do have the overview of Rove and their television interview. So Rove is interviewing Daniel Johns, who is a musician. And, sorry about that. Over here in blue are the questions that Rove questions Johns. So, is it a bit easier for you to get out there and do the promotion for an album? So I want to look at that part. Do the promotion for an album. Okay, so like an introduction where we introduce the main concepts of what we'll be talking about in our essay or in our piece, right? The introduction serves as a guideline as to what direction we want to go, the main ideas, the main concepts. And here, Rove is doing the exact same thing. It's in the beginning of the interview, after all. So in this case, Rove is steering the conversation towards the promotion of an album. And the only option there, the only option in question 5 that answers that directly is option D. If we look at question 6, what does Daniel mean when he says it's not a one listen kind of album? So if we look at this sentence by itself, or at least the bit of the sentence in question 6, it's quite difficult to comprehend. So let's take a look at the entire sentence, because, it's incomplete anyway. So It's about here. It's the kind of album that if you don't put in people's faces, then it runs the risk of being ignored because it's not a one listen kind of album. We can even look at the following sentence. You've really got to listen to it a few times to understand where it's going, and even then, you might hate it. So in this case, Daniel is not trying to tell us that the album is bad. He's actually saying that it's not it's not easily it's not instantly accessible, right? It's not something that you can just he says it's not something that you can put in people's faces. So it's not perhaps like popular or fits into the normal standard, like normal societal standard. He's saying that it's a bit different. You need to process the ideas behind the album before you can really appreciate it. So in that case, the option would be C, that is not instantly accessible to listeners. That answer really means that yeah, it's not easily comprehensible in the first time you listen to it. You just have to keep on, I guess, like trying to deconstruct it. That's what Daniel is trying to say. He's trying to say that there's depth to the album that is a bit unconventional. In question 7, which words best describes Verb's tone in the sentence? Sometimes I have to be complimentary to guess, but this time I actually do mean it. So tone is the overall feeling. So what we can do is we can look at the sentence and stage directions if we'd like to. So sometimes I have to be complimentary to guess, but this time I actually do mean it. Audience laughs. So it's a bit light-hearted. It's funny. But in the actual content of the sentence is that sometimes Rove has to fake liking their guests, but in this case, they genuinely do like Daniel. So he's being sincere. He genuinely likes Daniel's company. So genuinity and sincerity are very similar in that case. And we're saying it's positive because it's a positive message. He's saying that he genuinely likes Daniel. That's a good, happy message. So C would be a plausible answer. What does Daniel mean when he says a wider color spectrum? So just in general, color is representative of emotions. So right off the bat, we could just say that since color is representative of emotions, the answer would be a greater range of moods. Or if you'd like to, you can look at the text as in the entire sentence. So it starts from here. Yes, it was a conscious decision to move and approach a wider color spectrum, whereas it's restricting to know that there's only black and gray shades to work with, and once you kind of overcome that reliance on depression, then I think there's a lot to work with. So in this piece of dialogue, Daniel is basically saying that there's a strong focus on depression and dark themes in their album. So there's not much color, there's not much liveliness in the album itself. In question 9, you don't need to have the entire sentence to answer the question. So what type of language is busting rhymes? You can just use the busting rhymes part. So busting rhymes is specific to singing and music in general. No one would say like I don't know, right? Like busting an artwork, right? No one really says that. It's a bit weird to say, but we do hear people say things like busting out a rhyme as in singing. So because it's specific to music, that would make it jargon. If you guys are familiar with jargon, or if you're not, please look it up anyway. But jargon is basically technical language that is specific to that field. So for example, in English, we have techniques like personification, metaphor, simile. Those are specific words used in English. You wouldn't use it anywhere else. So that's what makes it English jargon. And lastly, for question 10, what is the main purpose of the interview? So remember that in the introduction, we were introduced to the fact that Rove is asking Daniel Johns about their journey to creating an album, and just their experience as a band, right? So since there's a strong focus on the album, it is to advertise their latest work. Though that's the main concepts that has been talked about in the entirety of the poem. There is not too much focus on Daniel's private life, as it talks about how Daniel's private life influences their album, but ultimately, right, we wouldn't be talking about Daniel's private life we weren't if we weren't in the direction of the album in itself. There's not too much explanation on Silverchair's success because they do talk about the present moment and the plateau that they reached. And to discuss Daniel's health problems, that is discussed. Like I mentioned before, there's a strong focus on the album. There's multiple examples, so that is why the answer would be B. That's all of the questions for today. Please read over the text, deconstruct it as you feel is appropriate, and please just try and recall how we have been reading figurative language. We haven't really been looking at the text too beyond its essential concepts, but we did deconstruct what it essentially means, right? Just basically translating English into its true simple meaning, because English does tend to romanticize and overcomplicate certain concepts because it just sounds fancier and more more aesthetic, I guess. And we did analyze the tone of the text, the overall feeling that we had, and also how this tone shifts in different social settings like interviews and poetry. So anyway, I'll let you guys go. That's everything for today. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week.